discussing chapter 2, section 14 last week, and the idea was that if partners divide, then each partner could compel the other partner to participate in the construction of a wall in order that they should each have their privacy. And here Maimonides quotes the phrase coined by the Talmud, which is called hezek re'iyah. You can damage me through sight, I can damage you through sight, and therefore we're both responsible to mitigate the payment. We mitigate the damage by paying for a wall. And we had this big idea that even if for many years I did not protest, I did not say, I want a wall and I want you to pay for half, and at any point, each party could unilaterally ask for a wall and ask for and have the other party participate in 50% of the value of the wall. What type of wall, that's already the local custom. So we may discuss that if we want to get into that. But that was the big idea last time. Now the question becomes, does this only apply to a courtyard, or according to Maimonides, and there are other opinions, it's not clear exactly where the Talmud comes down on this question. It's not clear what the Talmud is saying as a suggestion and what the Talmud says as a conclusion, so it's not so simple. But according to Maimonides, it applies not only in a courtyard, but also in what they call a gina, a garden. So the garden is not any place where I do any private business or private things like eating or drinking, or just living my life in my home. A garden is outdoors, and yet the concept of privacy applies to a garden as well. Question is how come and why? I'm going to get to that. And so that's what we're going to discuss today, begin to discuss today, and then maybe we'll get to the next topic as well. But for that, we'll jump right in. We're going to go to chapter 2, section, I think it's really, I want to get to 16, but maybe we'll start with 15 to get, because that was Vicky discussed that a little bit, which was the question of what type of fence they would make. I'm going to share the screen with God's help. Share, yeah, I think this works. Okay, let's go to 15. So we know we have to build a fence together. So where do they build a fence? You'll see later sometimes that when they would build a fence out of stone, depending on the type of stone, it could be quite big. It could be, you'll see sometimes it's either 5 hand breadths or 6 hand breadths. So we're talking probably a half a foot or a little bit more. So the question is, where is it placed? So 15 says the space where the wall will be built comes from both partners. Again, it's a partnership. It calls them partners. They're really neighbors, but that's part of the point here. A neighbor is a partner. So the space of the wall comes from both partners. How wide must the partition be? Everything depends on local custom. Even if the local custom is to make a partition from reeds and palm leaves, which were very thin and not too sturdy, but if that's what everybody does, that's sufficient to give me the privacy that I want. Such a partition is made, provided it does not leave open space for one neighbor to look and see his colleague. Okay, so that's the point here. The point here is the main point we're trying to protect here is the idea of privacy, and therefore what type of wall could each partner compel the other one to build? Whatever the local custom is, we're not particular, but the main thing is it has to be one that gives complete privacy and you can't see through in some areas. If you have reeds or palm leaves, you can peek through, that would not be sufficient. Okay, now we're going to read 16. I think I'll read the whole 16. There's 3 different clauses here, but we'll talk about one of the points that bring up an interesting discussion here. So 16, how high must the wall be? No smaller than 4 cubits. 4 cubits is considered in the Talmud to be the height of an average person. How much is a cubit? Well, a cubit is not 4 feet. 4 feet would be a little too small, but there's a debate exactly how big a cubit is. Some people would say it's probably somewhere between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. So we're talking about the fence has to be between 6 and 8 feet high. And that would be a sufficient fence to give me privacy. So that's what he says in the beginning of 16. How high must the wall be? No smaller than 4 cubits. Similarly, okay, now is the big deal, because not everybody agrees with this. Maimonides says this law that each partner could compel the other partner to create this partition and create privacy does not only pertain to a courtyard, to a yard in front of my house, but also to a garden. And garden is where you grow things. You don't have lunch there. You don't relax there. So seemingly, it does not really apply to the damage of sight. But we will discuss and see where Maimonides derives this from. Also from the Talmud, it's just not everybody agrees with this. But okay, so that's what he says in the next point. Similarly, in a garden, a person may compel his neighbor to separate their 2 gardens with a divider 10 handbreadths high. So this is very interesting. Here you can compel a division in a garden, but not a division that would create ultimate privacy. To do ultimate privacy, you need 4 cubits. 4 cubits, like I said, is 6 to 10 feet, to 6 to 8 feet. 10 handbreadths is probably 3 feet. So in the garden, I can compel a division. I can compel the other person to build a wall, but not a wall that would give me complete privacy. So why is that? And what's the function of this wall? We're going to discuss. But in a stretch of fields, there is no need to separate one person's stretch of fields from another unless it is local custom. So we have 3 categories. We have the house. There I can compel the other person to build a wall that's 4 cubits that would give me ultimate privacy. Then there is a garden where I grow vegetables. There I can compel a separation, but I can't compel the building of a wall, but not a building of the wall that would completely give me ultimate privacy, which is as high as an average person, but it's only 10 cubits, which I would say is 2.5 to 3 feet. So we have to figure out what that is all about. And then he says the third point is in a bika. Bika literally is a valley, but it's a valley of fields. People plant their fields and they go away. They don't come back for the next 3 months until things grow. Over there, you can't compel the other person to create a wall between the fields. So that is what Maimonides says. Maimonides here is just giving the law. He's not giving the background. So therefore, there's some question of where he gets this from. And that's what I want to look at and try to explain. For that, I have to peek in my notes, though. Okay, so what is the function of a field? What is the function? What is the function of a fence if it's not going to provide privacy? Right? So what is Maimonides' point? Maimonides' point is we could separate. I can compel you to separate from my garden. You keep half the garden, I keep the other half of the garden. But I want a wall. So I say, give me a wall. So we build a wall. How high can I compel you to build? Only 10 handbreadths, which is not the height of a person. Maybe it's 3 feet. So what would be the purpose of that wall? Why would I want it? So here, many commentaries believe that Maimonides is not really talking about, it's not really a question of damage, of sight. Why? Because it's not going to help. In other words, the remedy does not solve the problem of privacy because the wall is not high enough. So if the remedy is not solving the problem of privacy, then privacy cannot be the issue. Privacy cannot be the reason why I can compel the other person to build a wall in the garden. So what is the reason? This is a very interesting reason. It's a little strange. I have to mark off my property. Why? Because if I don't, someone is going to steal my property. So, but you have to think about this for a second. We're not talking about a fence that can prevent a thief from going into your house. It's a small little fence I could jump right over, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about a fence. The way the Talmud calls it that if I go into your field, when you have even a short fence, I will be caught as a thief. What does it mean? What do I mean? Let's say I walk into your field or your garden and there's no fence. and you say, what are you doing on my property? You obviously coming to steal my tomato. I say, what? I didn't realize it's closed off. I was just walking on the road and by mistake, I shifted into your property, but I'm not really here to steal. In other words, even if I am here to steal, I will say that I wasn't, and you can't prove to me that I was here to steal. So it's much more likely for me to go onto your land and take some tomatoes because I can always say, oh, I didn't realize that this is I'm not supposed to go here, right? If, however, you build a fence of 10 cubits, then it's clearly marked. Then if I go over your fence, you can come out with your shotgun and say, what are you doing on my property? What am I going to say? Oh, by mistake, I jumped over a wall that's 2.5 feet, right? No, it's demarked. If you want to have an example for this is on my street on Millbank Avenue, many people walk their dogs. So the neighbor a few houses down literally did something similar. He built a fence of stone, which is what? 1.5 feet. Why? That's why you're building this fence of stone, because he doesn't want the dogs, the homeowner, the people walking to let the dogs go onto the property. Now, if they want, they could jump over. Yeah, but if it's clearly marked, people are not going to enter. Why? Because they feel that it's a violation of your space. If there's no fence, and even if I know it's your private property, I could come on use it because I always have the excuse. Oh, it's not my. I'm here by mistake. This law applies to other areas as well. For example, he has Maimonides talks about. The Talmud talks about a case where we have 2 roofs touching. Now in Greenwich, God forbid, you can't live in that. House can't be touching someone else's. But when we grew up in Brooklyn, all the houses on the street, or most of the houses on the street, have shared roofs. It's right, one roof. You can walk from one to the other. So the same point, the Talmud says you can compel to put the fences between each person's partition. So if the other person's on your roof, you could say you don't belong here. You're a thief. Why are you trespassing? But to be able to ask why you're trespassing, you have to clearly mark the land. That is what people believe is what Maimonides says, that you could compel the garden, but you cannot compel the field. But you could compel the garden, you could compel the garden, but not to build a fence that's the height of a person, which is 4 cubits, but only a fence of 10 handbreadths, which is far less than the height of a person, so it's not going to provide privacy, but it will be a clear demarcation of this is my field. So if someone trespasses, it's clear that they're trespassing, and that is in some ways I'm looking for the word, that is the deterrence to the trespassing. Okay, now if this is such a beautiful reason, why does this not apply to a bik'ah, to a what do they call it? To a valley of fields? That was the end of 16. The end of 16, we said that you cannot compel me to build a division between my field and your field. In a vegetable garden, you can, at least a demarcation, but in the field, you don't have to. Why not? The field, I'm growing grain, you're growing grain. I don't want someone coming, taking my grain. It's important, seemingly, to make that demarcation in order to make it clear that nobody else should trespass. So there are at least 2 reasons. One reason, what are the reasons? It's the same reason. One reason is we're not so afraid about people trespassing into a field as opposed to a vegetable garden. Why? Because a vegetable garden, I know it sounds funny, but I'm going to put it out there. A vegetable garden is enticing. You have a beautiful fruit, you have a tomato, you have a pepper, it's enticing. A stalk of grain, even if you need it, even if it has value, it's not as enticing to the eye. I can't bite into it. I have to take it, I have to grind it, I have to make flour, I have to make bread. It's a whole Megillah to go make some bread. It's not as enticing. Here, I walk by a vegetable garden and say, wow, what a beautiful carrot. I'm going to pull it out and bite right into it. delicious. So I'm enticed to do so. So because I'm enticed to do so, I need that demarcation to give me a deterrent. So I shouldn't cross you shouldn't trespass, because if I do trespass, then you're going to say, what are you doing in my field? What are you doing in my garden? What am I going to say? I got hit by mistake. It wasn't a mistake. There was a wall. You jumped over the wall. Okay, so that's the deterrence. So that's the first difference. Like, according to some people, that's really the distinction, because the vegetable garden temptation is much higher. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that it's not about the type of temptation, it's about the duration of the temptation. In other words, in a vegetable garden, we grow things year round. So year round, it's a big. There's always vegetables. There's always the temptation. So it justifies the investment of building a fence or compelling the other person to build a fence. However, when it comes to a field of grain, so even though the value may be greater, but when is the grain ripening? When is the grain ready? Maybe a few weeks a year, maybe 1 month a year is when the grain is ready. So some people would say Maimonides is not going to force you to build a fence if it's just for a few weeks a year or 1 month a year. So that is the rationale of these two new laws that we entered over here. We said a new idea. You can compel the building of a fence not for privacy, but just to make it clear to prevent trespassing. And that applies specifically to a vegetable garden, but not to a field. And we offer 2 reasons to explain the distinction. That's the story in short so far. Okay, that's basically the first half of 16. Okay, now we have a new big idea. I can start reading the details, but there's a lot of details here. I don't want to get, unless you want details. If you want big ideas, we got to move to the next chapter. Let's go to the next big idea. So my preface is that a lot of people are not going to like this law. In other words, not this specific law, the premise of the law. The premise of the law is that if your neighbor benefits you and you acknowledge that you receive this benefit, you should participate in the payment for that benefit. You say, what do you mean? I don't agree. I didn't ask for it. Yeah, but if it benefited you, you should pay for it or participate in the paying. One way to think about it is it's not the same exact thing. It's like a co-op. If you have a condominium and the majority of the people want to improve and you don't, yeah, they can compel you. I understand the distinction there. You signed when you bought into the condominium, you signed that you're going to follow what everybody says. But in some sense, when you are neighbors and the neighbors invest in the betterment of your property, you may, in some cases, not across the board, in some cases, you would have to participate in the fee. And this is an interesting example. So the example that we're going to talk about over here is actually, the first one is not hard to understand. Later it gets harder to accept. But the first one is not hard to explain. So the premise is as follows. The premise is we said that, let's say I'm dividing my field, my courtyard. I want privacy. We've been neighbors for many years. We've been sharing this space for many years, but at some point we both want private, or one of us want privacy. We separate, we compel the building of a wall. What did we say? How much can I bill you for? So I can only bill you, I can only force you to participate in the construction of a wall up to 4 amot, up to 4 cubits, which is the height of the person, which then takes care of the problem of the privacy issue. Okay, now the question becomes, what happens if I want to build a wall, not 4 cubits, but I want to build a wall that's 10 cubits? For whatever reason, I want a higher roof, I want it, whatever it is, I want this division to go higher up more than 4. So I'm allowed to build more than 4. I can build up to 10 or whatever. I can build as high as I want. I just cannot compel you to participate in the cost of construction above 4 cubits. Okay. And here is the idea. However, what happens if you do something that indicates, even later on, you do something that indicates that actually you want the construction of the wall higher than 4 cubits? And we'll see the examples of what you do. So then your build for the part you didn't pay for to participate in the payment from 4 to 10. So for example, let's say we compel each other to build a wall that's 4 cubits. That's the standard. Then I go and I build a wall that's 10. I build a division that's 10 feet, 10 cubits. You only paid for your half of 4 cubits. I paid from 4 to 10. Okay. We come later, in 2 years from now, you build a wall next to our partition because you want to make a roof. You want to make an awning. but the wall you build is not 4 cubits, but it's 6 cubits. Ah, so you build 6 cubits. Now you're going to use some of my wall. I built a wall up to 10. So you're now going to be able to build an awning or build a roof based on the additional 2 cubits that I paid for. Ah, you like my wall. You like my wall, you're going to pay for it. In other words, you're going to participate in the payment of the additional part that you didn't participate in before. Now, in the Talmud is a debate. One opinion says that even if you're only building 6, because you show that you're happy with the wall over 4, you're going to have to pay 50% of the entire wall up to 10 cubits. That's the more strict opinion, or the opinion that's more broad. Maimonides takes the other opinion, which is more narrow. No, the neighbor who doesn't want a wall over 4 will only have to pay for the part of the wall that his actions indicate that he wants. So in our example, I compel you to pay for the wall up to 4. I build it up to 10. And then 2 years from now, you build up to 6. So then the only thing you have to pay for is 50% of those 2 cubits, not those extra 6 cubits. We're only billing you for the part that you clearly indicate that you want to use. So that's one example. So again, this now breaks up into many more cases, but that's the big idea. The big idea is I can compel you to build a wall only as high as will give me privacy, which is 4 cubits. But if I pay for the wall, a higher wall, and then even if it's a long time later on, you indicate somehow that you're now going to get benefit from this wall, even if you didn't benefit directly yet. You built a wall and you're going to build and you're going to derive benefits. There's another example, which is you don't even have to build a wall. So we have the wall that's dividing us. So on my side, I would make holes in the wall to be able to receive beams, to hold the beams. You see what I'm saying? So I drill a hole in the wood stone so it can support a beam. Even before I put the beam, you already bill me for as high as the beams were. I made a mistake actually. The beam may be a beam for a floor. So if I put the beam at 6 feet, I can bill you. If you put the beam at 6 feet, I could bill you all the way to 10 feet because the beam, if it's the beam for a floor, then you want to use that as a floor, so you're benefiting. The point is we have to figure out and say that even if we can't compel you to participate in the beginning for a cost that you did not agree to, but if later you do something to show that you are benefiting from this construction, then you're going to have to pay your share of that construction. That is the easy part to understand. Later we get the parts that are more difficult. So we have
and if the property was sold,
if the property is sold, that's a good question. That is a very good question. So your property was sold and the first party never showed any interest in a wall above 4. Then the neighbor shows up, the purchaser shows up and he says, okay, wonderful idea. Why don't I benefit from the wall that's above 4, from 4 to 10? I don't know for sure, but my guess is we may bill him. I could say, look, listen, you don't have any right to this wall above 4 feet. Above 4 cubits. If you want to benefit and use my wall above 4 cubits, you're going to have to pay for the construction of that part. This is relatively conservative. Remember, the Talmud has 2 opinions. Go ahead.
That's debatable. He already bought it from someone, so he is entitled of every benefits which he can see, and he doesn't care who built the wall before.
Zina, I'll tell you like this. When I buy land from you, whatever land it is, right? I buy all the rights that you had, no less and no more.
Okay.
So if the seller was not able to build above 4 cubits without participating in that wall, then the buyer cannot either. Okay, we may not be talking about the same thing. Once the seller paid for it, for that part of the wall, then the person who buys from the seller does not have to pay. Okay, let me clarify. Let's start again. Make sure we're on the same page. There's me and Zina. We're neighbors. I mean, we got along for many years. I say, Zina, I want to give you your privacy. Leave me alone. You don't have to see me. I don't have to see you. We're going to build a wall. Zina's wonderful. We're going to build a wall. So Zina says, okay, you got your construction crew. How tall are you building? I say, well, I'm building 10 cubits. You say, whoa, I don't want 10 cubits. I only want 4 cubits. So I say, Zina, okay, you want 4 cubits? You pay for your half of 4 cubits. I will pay myself from the 4 to the 6. Okay, fine.
Okay.
Now, if at that point, after I do that, you sell your home, someone else comes in and someone else wants to build a wall up to 6 or up to 10 and wants the benefits, then I say, look, Mr. Buyer, your seller, Zena, would not be able to build here without paying me, so you have to pay me. However, if before Zena sold, Zena, you built the wall up to 10, and you paid your 50% of the entire construction of the wall, then the buyer from you, the person who buys from you, is not going to have to pay me because you already paid me, right? You can't just keep making profit off the wall. Once the wall was paid for by my neighbor, then that lot has all that usage. But the logic is that you cannot give somebody else more rights than you yourself had. So if you only had the right to use up to 4 without payment, I mean, actually you did pay up to 4. I'm sorry, you paid up to 4. If you only had the right to use up to 4, then your buyer cannot claim to have the right to use up to 10 without participating in the costs. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I believe there is a law. If you've been using someone else's property for some time,
Yeah,
7 or 10 years.
yeah, that would apply in the Talmud as well. That's correct. If in this scenario, that's correct. So in this case, me and you built the wall. I built the wall up to 10. You only paid for 4, and I'm quiet for a year. And I show up next year and say, Zena, you got to build. You have to pay for the wall from 4 to 10. You don't have to pay, because since I allowed you to use without protesting, it means I was what they call mechila, which means I forgive that sort of responsibility that you have to pay. I forgive it, and you're right, you would not have to pay.
Okay.
I am really upset here, Rabbi.
I knew it. I'm not surprised. If you were not upset, I would be surprised. But go ahead.
But you probably know why, right?
Go ahead. Make sure I understand. I don't want to present another problem. So I'm quiet. Let's hear your problem. I don't want to.
Okay. My neighbor is building a wall.
Yeah.
Why should I pay for it? I might enjoy this wall, but he never asked me. We never agreed on the price. Suddenly he comes, shows at my house and tells me, you have to pay for half of this wall. I don't think I will survive.
Let's make sure we're understanding the exact case, and then we see what we like, what we don't like. The premise is, let's start with a wall of 4. The premise is that we each have the right to separate and the right to privacy. We don't have an equivalent like that in American law, but let's take from the Talmudic perspective. Talmudic perspective is that if you buy land, you're also entitled to get the privacy, because not entitled, it's much more than that. I have to make sure it's the other way around. Let's start from the beginning. Let me take a step back. In America, a lot of society is premised around rights, right? We like to think about rights. These are my rights. I have a Bill of Rights. Everybody's got rights. And in the Torah, you also have rights, but the focus is not so much on rights, even though you'll get the same rights, and sometimes you'll get more rights, but the focus is almost like responsibility. So in this case, instead of saying I have the right to privacy, which I do, the way it's framed is I am not allowed to invade your privacy. Hezek Re'iyah, I'm not allowed to damage your land. How do I damage your land? If I'm looking, then you can't use your garden your front yard the way everyone uses their front yard. Remember, the society we're talking about, a society where they only sleep in the house. Outside, you do everything, right? I don't know. I don't want you to know which channel television I watch. If I watch Fox News or CNN, I don't want you to know, right? So I'm entitled to privacy. If not entitled. So if I look at your property, I'm damaging you. So let's switch it. Zena and Zach, you guys want to build a wall. I say, I don't want to build a wall. I don't want to pay for the wall. How can you compel me to pay for the wall? So the Talmudic logic would be, Menachem, you have to pay. You know why? Because if there's no wall, you're damaging them. And a person has to pay to eliminate their damage. So that's the big shift. Now, so that is once you make peace with that, now we're trying, at least so far, later you're going to get more upset, but so far we're actually relatively conservative, because we're saying that I only have to pay for the minimum to make sure that I don't invade your privacy. And above that, I don't have to pay for anything that I don't agree to use. So once you accept the premise, it's actually a little conservative, because other people take it even more. Other people would say that if I agree to use part of the wall above 4, I have to pay for my portion of the entire wall above 4. Maimonides doesn't take that opinion. He takes the more conservative opinion. So again, I understand that it's uncomfortable for people because we come from a society where we are into our rights and our freedoms. So it's almost coming from a little different perspective. But it's still interesting to note that even with that premise, Maimonides chooses the more conservative view, where you only compel the guy to pay for that share of what he is using or wants to use.
No,
I don't know if it makes it better or worse.
I still see a problem here, because where does the privacy end? What if I don't like the sound that comes from your property, the smell that comes from your property? I mean, that's my problem at some point. Why should the other person pay for something that I'm uncomfortable with?
So you're making a good point, and there's a lot of laws in the Talmud about different forms of damage, of noise, of smell, and what I'm allowed to bring. Like if I'm your neighbor, can I start raising chickens and smell the whole place up, right? So there's different. There's all kinds of laws about that. But I will tell you that of all the laws, and a lot of the laws is like in America, where there's some right. I know a lot of people don't like this, but there's some rights for zoning. There's some ability of people to say, this is the common practice, this is not the common practice. You cannot bring a commercial area into a residential area, right? So the Talmud is aware of that. But of all the rights that I have, in other words, of all the rights that I have, the responsibility not to damage someone else, the Talmud takes privacy, it takes it more serious than other damages. In other words, no other intangible damage is labeled as a damage, as a direct damage, the way sight is, the way seeing is. So of all those rights that you mentioned, yes, the Talmud is very serious about it. Now, again, remember, it's different in our days, because nowadays, even in America, a lot of the law, privacy is tied into the expectation of privacy, right? You go to the cases, are the police allowed to walk into your phone without a warrant, Fourth Amendment? So it all boils down, according to the Supreme Court, it all boils down to the question of, where do you have an expectation of privacy? So the question of privacy is tied into the expectation of privacy. And if you were living in Iraq, if you were living in Babylonia, where most of your day you spend in your courtyard, people have an expectation of privacy. So part of that is that we have to protect that expectation. So again, it's not exactly transferable to Greenwich, Connecticut, or some other town in the United States, but you have to look at what are the underlying values. And the underlying values is that we take the right to privacy to an extreme, which I think is surprising for a religion, but okay. That's just me.
I just want to add to that. It's not only not surprising, it's fascinating laws, especially the one that even values the separation, not only for privacy, but just to mark the territory, because it emphasizes the value of respecting each other's boundaries and protecting. Yeah, so I mean, we don't have to follow it to the, because secular law doesn't support it, but it's very important. But it's fascinating. It is for the psychology of it.
I agree.
The importance of personal boundaries and the respect of other people's boundaries.
Right, but I'm going to make Zach's point. Will argue that Zach and others are very concerned about the idea of a person's freedom, and if you're going to compel me to pay for something without my agreement, that is a big deal. That is a big deal. And I'm not disagreeing with Zach. I agree that it's a big deal, and I agree it's unusual, and I agree that it's an anomaly. It's not it's not in line with the Torah's usual laws of the usage of land. right? Typically, you can't force someone to pay for something that they don't want or they don't benefit from.
People will benefit from, like, if you take psychology point of view, they will benefit from respecting others' people privacy.
But could you bill
But they
me
will
for something that I did not
event.
could you bill me for something that I did not explicitly show that I want? So forget about I think we have to get to the underlying question is forget about the part from 4 to 10. Let's talk about the compelling of building the wall itself, which is really the subject of last week. And that's the big idea. The big idea is one neighbor can compel the other neighbor to build, to pay for a wall that's 4 cubits high. That is a big deal. And I'm not minimizing the quote unquote, how this is troublesome. You're forcing someone to pay for something that they don't participate in the payment of something that they don't want. Yes, it is an anomaly. It's not the usual, it doesn't follow the usual laws of the Torah, but the way the Torah will sees this problem, the way the Talmud sees this problem is classifying me seeing your lot as me damaging you. That is that's the legal catch. That's the philosophy of the law. And if the Talmud is trigger hungry, they would start billing you for many other things. They don't always do that. This is more of the exception than the rule.
I see your point.
When you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Zach.
I see your point, and I agree with you. I'm glad that I asked you this question.
Now, the problem is that if you come back next week, you're not going to agree with me because we take it a little further. So I defended now the basic law, and I agree that it's the exception, but it's not the only exception. So I need you to be here to keep us in check, right?
I'll tell you why I disagreed at the beginning.
Go ahead.
It was old Russian scheme, which is called cheburashka. A man, goes walking on the street. Somebody comes to him, another man, and tells him, "Would you like to see cheburashka?" He says yes. And then there is a woman that would expose herself, and the man would come and say, "Pay me 5 rubles."
Right.
I was against this because
Right.
he could have benefited. But
I'll tell you the same thing. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, it wasn't that safe. Today, everybody wants to be in Brooklyn. When I was growing up, it wasn't that safe. So you stop at a red light, somebody would come to your window, and your window is perfectly clean, and they would clean your window. You can't go anywhere. It's a red light. Now they say, "Give me money."
right.
You know, if you don't pay them, they're going to break your window because they've cleaned your window, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. You can't be going around helping people and then billing them, right?
But your point that it is aggression against somebody, that they protect themselves, they certainly have a right. Now you got me.
Yeah, but again, I want you to come back in the future weeks because there's this balance, and we're going to try to figure out when are you conceding and when you're not conceding, and there's going to be at least a case or two where you can argue that this is not, the person did not agree. I'm getting a benefit without my consent, and billing me as tyranny. So I'm not saying that the concern is not there, and I'm not saying this is the only exception. So this law is much easier for me to defend than some of the laws that are going to follow. But therefore I want you to come back to make sure that we're still on the straight and narrow and we don't give up all our rights. But what I'm trying to say here is that all these concepts are the exception to the rule. And I acknowledge, because it is a problem. It is a problem to start billing people for things that they don't want.
Rabbi, can I ask you something? Next time, we are going to talk about the noise and the smell or not?
We're going to get to noise and smell. It's not in the immediate future, but we're in chapter 3. There's only 12 chapters. So we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it eventually.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, but it's just fascinating how people, that this is what they would, for 2,000 years, we're sitting here trying to figure out who should pay for the bathroom noise and who should pay for the bathroom smell, and how do you divide the site. So it keeps us out of trouble. It keeps us from Cain killing Hevel because we have other things to fight about.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a narrow, it's a subtle level. At some point, environmentalists, they insist that everybody would pay for something, which in my view is ridiculous, but it could be logical conclusion of this wall.
Yeah, good, because you could say you're damaging. And how do you define damage? Agreed. And therefore, I think that any Talmudic law of any legal principle could be taken too far, right?
Right.
Privacy can be taken too far. So I could
Right.
not allow you to walk on the street when I'm walking on the street, right? The president is driving down the street to shut down the whole city. Privacy.
Yeah.
Any principle could be taken too far. So every principle could be abused. So it's important that how the Talmud uses and applies this damage. And I think that this case that we spoke today is very telling, because Maimonides had a choice. He could have taken it more liberal or more conservative, right? The Talmud says that if in the case where I build 10, you agree to 4 cubits, I build 10, and then you want to use 6. In other words, an additional 2. So can I bill you for your share of the additional 2, or can I bill you for the share in the additional 6? Right? Can I bill you for more than what you want to use? Right? So this is a case where Maimonides took the more narrow view, and that becomes the law, right? So even when you have the principle, you have to be careful not to take it too far and to make sure it's balanced by the other values. So this is fascinating stuff.
Rabbi, I just want to make sure to bring up another benefit of studying that.
Yes.
And that's interesting that Dina mentioned at the beginning, the story of one brother killing another. So that definitely will keep us from killing each other. But on the other hand, if you get into details of discussing what exactly damages other person and what the other person's right is for privacy, for protecting himself or herself from damages, that already in itself has very, very, very big benefit.
Yeah, I wanted to say, we mentioned a place of demarcation. I don't know, when Cain came into Hevel's house to kill him, I don't know that Hevel said, why are you trespassing? I don't know that idea was developed yet, right? So I could just trespass right into your house and then just shoot you, as opposed to, if it's clear, if you're coming over the demarcation, you're the aggressor. If you're the aggressor, I could defend myself, right? So the whole idea, even self-defense, is premised on the concepts that there are boundaries. And if you're going to overcome the boundary, and the Talmud is actually very understanding for people protecting their own property in their own land, even with deadly force in some cases. We can discuss that at some other time. But this whole concept, even the concept of self-defense, is tied into privacy, demarcation. You can't cross boundaries, etc. Okay, this is fun. I hope to reconvene next week on Tuesday at 10 a.m. in good health. And it's always good to get a good debate going. So thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
Wonderful day. Wonderful day.
you.